Don't turn around. Just drive and don't look at the mirrors." The command came from the darkness of the back seat, a voice that was small, trembling, yet possessed a terrifying urgency that frozen Elias Thorne's hand on the ignition of his Aston Martin. It wasn't the rough bark of a carjacker or the cold tone of a corporate rival. It was the desperate whisper of a child. The heavy rain hammered against the windshield of the dimly lit executive parking garage, blurring the world outside into gray static. But the cold steel of fear in Elias's chest was crystal clear. He instinctively checked the rearview mirror, his heart hammering against his ribs, expecting a weapon, but saw only large, terrified eyes staring back from the shadows, eyes that had witnessed something meant to remain buried forever. "They are watching from the elevators," she hissed, shrinking lower into the leather seats. "And if you stay here another 60 seconds, you're never going home." Elias Thorne was a man who believed he controlled every variable in his universe, a master of his own destiny who had risen from nothing to touch the sky. At 55, he was the architect of Thorne Skyline, a real estate empire that had reshaped the city's horizon, turning him into a self-made billionaire who commanded respect with a single steely glance. He had spent the last 2 decades building impenetrable walls around himself, trusting only a select inner circle. His charismatic business partner, Julian Sterling, who had been his best man, and his impeccably organized chief of operations, Victoria Vance, who knew his life better than he did. Tonight was supposed to be the absolute pinnacle of his career. Tomorrow morning, they were scheduled to sign the Aurora contract, a multi-billion-dollar government deal to build a sustainable smart city, a legacy project that would immortalize his name in history books. He had left the office late, feeling the intoxicating weight of triumph, the champagne still lingering on his palate, never suspecting that the marble foundation of his life was actually crumbling beneath his feet. He had no wife, no children, just the empire. And for 50 years he had convinced himself that was enough. "How did you get in here?" Elias asked, his voice low and steady, fighting the primal urge to whip around as he eased the car out of the parking spot, the tires squealing softly on the polished concrete. He saw the girl properly now in the passing flashes of orange streetlights. She was a young black girl, maybe 8 years old, wearing a worn-out hoodie that was 2 sizes too big, and sneakers held together by silver duct tape. "The janitor left the side door unlocked," she murmured, her eyes darting frantically to the side mirrors, checking for pursuers like a seasoned fugitive. "I was looking for a place to sleep where it was dry. I saw them, the man in the fancy gray suit and the woman with the sharp heels. They were standing right by your car before you came down." Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the car's air conditioning. It was the freezing touch of recognition. She was describing Julian and Victoria perfectly, down to Victoria's signature stilettos. "They put something under the seat," she added, her voice shaking with the memory. "And they were laughing, mister. They were laughing really hard. They said the old lion falls tonight." Elias gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, the leather creaking under the pressure, his mind racing through the implications of her words with sickening speed. Julian had been his brother in arms since college, the man who had pulled him out of depression after his parents died. Victoria had managed his entire existence for 12 years, carrying his secrets and his schedule. The idea of them plotting against him felt physically nauseating, a betrayal so deep and visceral it threatened to stop his heart right there in the driver's seat. A wave of dizziness washed over him as memories flashed, Julian toasting to his health just hours ago, Victoria smiling as she handed him his coat. It was all a lie. "What else did they say?" Elias demanded, merging onto the highway to put distance between himself and the tower, his voice cracking. The girl hugged her knees to her chest, making herself small. They said you're too old and too soft. They said the police will find the evidence. Fabadillions in the trunk tomorrow morning, and by the time you get out of jail, the company will be theirs. The realization hit Elias like a physical blow to the stomach. They weren't just pushing him out. They were framing him for a crime he didn't commit, using his trust as the weapon to destroy him. But why would a homeless child risk her life to warn a man who lived in a tower she wasn't even allowed to enter? The answer to that question would soon reveal a connection far deeper than money. But first, Elias had to survive the night without crashing under the weight of his broken reality. As the city lights blurred past them, Elias drove with a cold, calculated fury he hadn't felt since his early days of fighting for contracts in the mud. But beneath the anger, a river of paranoia began to rise. Every pair of headlights in his rearview mirror looked like a threat. Every black SUV that pulled alongside them made his heart skip a beat. Was Julian following him? Did they have trackers on the car? He checked the mirrors obsessively, his eyes darting back and forth, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool air. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, isolating them in a cocoon of noise and darkness. He glanced at the girl in the rearview mirror, seeing the grime on her face, but also a sharp, undeniable intelligence in her eyes. She wasn't just scared. She was alert. "I'm Elias," he said, trying to soften his tone, realizing he was gripping the wheel so hard his hands hurt. "What's your name?" She hesitated for a long moment, assessing him, deciding if he was worth the truth. "Maya," she whispered finally. "Where do you live, Maya?" She shrugged, a gesture of heartbreaking indifference that spoke volumes about her life. "Anywhere safe. Usually the library during the day, shelters at night if they aren't full. People don't look at kids like me, Mr. Elias. We're invisible. That's why your friends didn't see me behind the concrete pillar." The irony tasted like ash in Elias's mouth. His friends were polished, wealthy predators who ignored the vulnerable, while this invisible child was the only thing standing between him and life in a federal prison cell. He realized then that his ivory tower had blinded him to the reality of the streets and to the true nature of the vipers sleeping in his boardroom. 30 minutes later, they were parked in the back lot of a rundown 24-hour diner on the edge of town, far from the prying eyes of the business district and the luxury he was used to. The neon sign buzzed ominously overhead as they sat in a cracked vinyl booth. Elias bought Maya a hot meal, burgers and fries, which she ate with a speed that spoke of deep, painful hunger, wiping grease from her chin while he stared at his cold coffee, his stomach in knots. The contrast was stark. A billionaire in a bespoke Italian suit sitting across from a child in rags, united by a conspiracy. He wasn't calling the police. He knew Julian had deep connections there, golfing buddies with the commissioner. Instead, he called Silas Graves, an ex-military forensic accountant he had let go years ago at Victoria's insistence. A decision he now realized was manipulated to remove his only loyal protector. "Silas, I need you." "I think I've been set up," Elias said, his voice grim and hushed. While he waited for Silas to dig into the servers remotely, a text popped up from Victoria. "Get some rest, Elias. Big day tomorrow. We've handled all the final compliance checks. You just need to sign." The text was followed by a thumbs-up emoji from Julian. The casual cruelty of it made Elias want to throw the phone through the window. Maya peeked at the screen and scoffed, dipping a fry in ketchup. "My grandma used to say, 'The devil doesn't come with horns. He comes with a smile and a contract.'" They think you're stupid, don't they? They think you're just a wallet with legs. Silas arrived at the diner an hour later, shaking the rain off his heavy coat, his laptop under his arm, and a grim look on his scarred face. He ignored the strangeness of the billionaire and the homeless girl sharing a booth and plugged immediately into the data stream, his fingers flying across the keyboard. But it wasn't easy. Minutes stretched into an agonizing half-hour. Silas frowned, sweat dripping down his nose. They've buried it deep, Elias. It's not just a simple transfer. They've routed it through shell companies in 4 different countries. It's encrypted behind layers I've never seen before. Elias felt the walls closing in. If Silas couldn't find the proof, the word of a homeless girl wouldn't stand up in court against 2 respected executives. "I can't break the final firewall," Silas muttered, frustration evident in his voice. "If we don't get this, you go to jail tomorrow." The diner seemed to go silent. Maya stopped eating. Then Silas hit a key, and his eyes widened. "Wait, they got sloppy. They logged in from the office IP address just once." He tapped furiously. "Got it. It's a masterclass in framing. They've been funneling money from the pension fund into an offshore account in your name for 6 months. The evidence Maya saw them plant? Probably the physical ledger or the hard drive linking you to the account." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. It was a perfect trap. If he signed the Aurora contract tomorrow, he would be legally validating the current financials, effectively signing his own confession. "We have the digital trail," Silas said, breathing hard. "But it's circumstantial. We need a confession." Maya wiped ketchup from her face and leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a plan. "They don't know I exist," she said softly, "and they don't know you know. If you walk into that room tomorrow like a scared little sheep, they'll get sloppy, and I can get close enough to catch them bragging." Elias looked at the small girl, realizing that his survival depended on the courage of a child who had nothing to lose. The next morning, the conference room on the 40th floor of Thorne's skyline was a theater of deceit, polished to a high sheen. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the mahogany table where Julian and Victoria sat, looking immaculate, refreshed and predatory. They checked their watches, sharing smug whispers, confident that their plan was minutes away from completion. Julian stood up as Elias entered, spreading his arms wide in a gesture of fake warmth that made Elias's skin crawl. "The man of the hour! You look tired, Elias. Rough night? Nerves getting to you at your age?" Victoria pushed a cup of coffee toward him, her smile tight and practiced, her eyes scanning him for any sign of suspicion. "Drink up, Elias. We need you sharp. The government officials will be here in 20 minutes. On the table sat the massive Aurora contract, flagged with yellow sticky notes indicating where Elias needed to sign his life away. Elias sat down heavily, feigning exhaustion, his hands trembling slightly, a performance he had rehearsed in the mirror to feed their egos. I feel like something is wrong with the numbers, Julian," Elias stammered, his voice weak, watching their reactions closely. Julian exchanged a quick, amused glance with Victoria, a look that said, "We've got him." "Nonsense," Julian soothed, placing a heavy, condescending hand on Elias's shoulder, squeezing just a bit too hard. "You're just getting old, partner. Your mind isn't what it used to be. Let us handle the details. You just be the face. Just sign the paper and go rest." "Actually," Elias said, and the tremble in his hands vanished instantly. He sat up straighter, his eyes locking onto Julian's with the intensity of a predator. "I think the numbers are perfect. Specifically, the $5 million moved to the Cayman Islands last Tuesday from the Employee Pension Fund. The silence that fell over the room was absolute, sucking the air out of the space. Victoria's smile froze, looking like a cracked porcelain mask, her coffee cup pausing halfway to her lips. Julian's hand slowly retracted from Elias's shoulder, as if he had touched a hot stove. "I don't know what you're talking about," Julian sneered, though a bead of sweat appeared instantly on his temple. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a nervous bark. "You're losing your mind, Elias. This is senility. Maybe we need to call security and have you escorted out for your own good." Victoria stood up, her voice shrill. "How dare you accuse us? After everything we've done for you, you ungrateful old man. Sign the papers or we call the board and have you declared unfit." They were doubling down, their arrogance blinding them to the trap that had already snapped shut. Elias leaned back, crossing his arms, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Oh, security is already here. Silas?" The boardroom doors burst open with a crash that made Victoria jump. Silas walked in, not with private security guards, but with two high-ranking FBI agents in windbreakers. He slammed a laptop onto the mahogany table, the sound echoing like a gunshot, and projected a series of bank transfers and emails directly onto the massive wall screen. The emails were damning. Julian and Victoria joking about the old Lions retirement party in federal prison, mocking Elias's trust. "This is illegal hacking!" Victoria shrieked, her composure shattering completely. "You can't prove we sent those. You could have fabricated this. It's a setup." Julian began to shout over her, his face turning purple. "He's crazy. He's trying to frame us." "We thought you might say that," Elias said calmly, his voice cutting through their panic. "So we brought an eyewitness." From the adjoining kitchenette, where the catering staff usually set up, little Maya stepped out. She was no longer in dirty rags. She was dressed in a clean, crisp dress Elias had bought that morning, holding a tablet connected to the room's speakers. Julian's face went pale, his eyes bulging. "Who is this brat?" he spat. Maya didn't flinch. She pressed a button on the tablet. The room filled with high-definition audio recorded just 10 hours ago in the garage. Julian's voice. "Put the drive under the driver's seat. Once he signs tomorrow, we call the tip line. He'll rot in a cell while we spend his fortune." Victoria's voice. "God, he's so pathetic. He trusts us like a dog." The recording ended in the dead silence. Maya looked Julian dead in the eye. "I'm the invisible girl," she said clearly. "And dogs bite." The FBI agents moved in, handcuffs clicking shut on wrists that had never known consequences. As Julian was dragged out, screaming threats and obscenities, and Victoria wept in sudden, ugly terror, Elias looked at Maya. The storm was over, but for Elias, the real journey was just beginning. In the weeks that followed, the scandal rocked the business world like an earthquake. The footage of the arrests was everywhere, and the Aurora contract was put on hold. But Thorne's skyline stood taller than ever. With the rot cut out, the company thrived under transparent leadership. Elias was no longer the isolated king in his ivory tower. The betrayal had broken him open, but it had also let the light in. He dropped the charges against the company itself, paid the fines out of his own pocket, and restructured the entire board to ensure checks and balances. But his most important meeting wasn't with shareholders, lawyers, or the press. It was with a social worker and a genealogy expert Silas had recommended. Elias had felt an inexplicable pull toward Maya from the moment he saw her in the rearview mirror. Not just gratitude, but a sense of biological familiarity in her fierce eyes and her sharp wit. He had asked Silas to look into her background, to find out who she was, and if she had any family left, praying for an answer he was afraid to hear. They sat in Elias's penthouse living room, the city spread out below them like a map of lights. Maya was drawing in a sketchbook, looking healthy, fed, and safe for the first time in her life. Elias held a manila folder with trembling hands, his heart pounding harder than it had during the confrontation with Julian. "Maya," he started softly, kneeling beside her. "Do you know who your grandfather was?" She shook her head without looking up. "My mom said he died before I was born. She said he was a stubborn man who loved building things, but he had a brother he never spoke to." Elias opened the folder, revealing an old, faded photograph of a young Elias standing next to an older man who looked exactly like him, his estranged brother Marcus, who had left the family 30 years ago after a bitter fight about the company. "Your mother was my niece," Elias said, tears welling in his eyes and spilling over. "I tried to find Marcus for years, but he didn't want to be found. You have his eyes, Maya, and his stubbornness." Maya stopped drawing. She looked at the photo, then at Elias, tracing the faces with her small finger. "So, I wasn't just hiding in a stranger's car?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "No," Elias replied, his voice breaking as he pulled her into a hug. "You were coming home." 5 years later, Elias Thorne stood on the stage of a massive auditorium, the lights blindingly bright. He wasn't announcing a new skyscraper or a merger. He was handing out the first Maya Thorne Scholarship for underprivileged youth. Beside him stood Maya, now 13, confident and brilliant, wearing a blazer that matched her grandfather's style. She took the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces. Kids who looked just like she once did, invisible to the world, dismissed by society. "My uncle taught me how to build businesses," she told the crowd, her voice ringing with power and purpose. "But I taught him that you can't build anything strong if you ignore the people standing in the shadows. We are not invisible. We are the foundation." Elias watched her, bursting with a pride that money could never buy. Julian and Victoria had tried to take his fortune, but in their greed, they had inadvertently reunited a broken family and given Elias a legacy far greater than concrete and steel. He learned that true wealth isn't what you keep in a bank account or the contracts you sign. It's who you let in the car when it's raining.